Texas Title. We're sitting down with Chris and Andy. There's some really great title attorneys. So we have a few questions that we're going to ask them today so you can understand why we need title companies and what all they do. And from there, we're going to ask, what do title companies do?
We play a lot of solitaire on our computers, surf the internet. No. In Texas, title companies, different states that are structured differently, but in Texas, there's really a couple of different functions that title companies play, and so I'll kind of mention each of those. The first is we act as an escrow agent, and what that means is we're a neutral party that accepts the contract, and then all of the closing documents all pass through our office. And along with the documents, it's also the funds. So as escrow agent, we'll receive the contract, we'll receive earnest money typically. So if a buyer is putting down earnest money, we hold that in a special escrow account, and all that money is segregated. And then working up to closing, we receive any invoices or documents that'll need to be handled at closing. We'll receive loan documents if there's a loan, and then we'll receive the actual transaction documents like the deed. We'll prepare the settlement statement that shows who all will be paid out of a closing. And then when it comes time to close, we collect all the signatures from the parties. And after we have the signatures, we get their money. And once everyone has signed, I like to say when we've received the last penny and the last signature, then we'll turn around and close escrow. You hear that term a lot, which just means that we're going to then disperse all the funds, record the deed and the other closing documents at the courthouse, if there's loan documents to be recorded, and then pay everyone. So that is the escrow process of collecting all those documents, making sure we have everything, and then paying it all out. Another component of what we do is the actual title side, and so we're a title insurance company, which means that we issue title insurance. And to understand what that is, it's an insurance policy that we issue through an underwriter. So pretty much all title companies have a large underwriter that backs them up. And what we do there is we go and search the title, and we're looking to see if we find any problems, to make sure that the seller actually owns the property, or if it's a loan that the borrower owns the property. And then we check to see if there's any easements against it, or if we find anything that encumbers or affects your right to use the property.
Taxes, things like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, we check taxes, we check for judgments and tax liens and anything that could affect ownership of the property.
Okay.
We check all that, and sometimes we'll find that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. Maybe a prior deed wasn't signed correctly, or someone hasn't signed a deed and title is still in someone else's name. In that case, we make a requirement that that be fixed. But we do that whole process until we're satisfied that title is insurable, and hopefully it gets to be insurable. And then at closing, once we've closed, we issue a title insurance policy to the buyer and to the lender, ensuring that they have good ownership of the property, or in the lender's case, a good lien on the property. So.
Well, you answered 3 of my questions that I was waiting to ask.
It's going to be a short podcast. Yes, thank you.
So for real estate agents, if we go down that road, what is the thing that we can do to help make this a quick and easy close for our clients, both seller and buyer side?
Chris?
Honestly, the thing that probably is the most helpful from the very jump, so like when you guys are doing a contract, is to make sure that the contract is completely filled out, and to make sure that it contains the contact information for both parties.
Okay.
You know, one of the things, it's a simple thing, but it's something that gets missed periodically, and we're left kind of chasing people sometimes, and that kind of sometimes puts the agent in the position of having to like be the middleman or go back and forth. And so sometimes that's just the easiest thing to do, is just make sure we can get with those people. The other thing, you know, sometimes people want to try and, you know, sort of pre-address these issues, or sort of make sure that they've got all their ducks in a row. And sometimes that's hard to do, because until the title examination is done, you don't really know, you know, what kind of issues you are going to run into. But at the same time, you can on the front end be asking questions, and maybe at least prepping your seller, prepping your buyer that, hey, some of these things are going to potentially pop up. And so, for example, if from the beginning you have the tax information, like the appraisal district, and you see that, well, this doesn't match up with who I'm dealing with, maybe we need to inquire, who is this person, and maybe they say, well, that was my husband, he passed away.
Right.
That might be give you guys a little bit of an inkling that there may be something that's going to happen there, and kind of start laying the groundwork with them. Well, did you talk to a probate lawyer? Did you do it? Anything like that. Another one is just knowing, hey, I'm going to be out of town, or my husband's going to be out of town. What are our options? Well, maybe we need to consider using a power of attorney or a mobile notary, kind of knowing those things on the front end. So I think it's just kind of having that like sort of sense when you're starting to go through it of, ooh, these are a potential issue, this is a potential problem, and trying to kind of head those off. But honestly, just being in communication, working with us, working with your client, that's the best thing you can do.
Wow, you are really good because everybody's younger than you. Y'all just answered that.
Really dialed in this afternoon.
Yeah, you're
Right.
great. That's
So-
the reason we love First Texas.
I know. There's a lot of times I call, and if anything I don't know or I have a question on something, these guys are like on the ball and on the spot, and they'll get me the answer right away. If they don't, they look it up for me, and because they know where to find it.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So sometimes, there comes a situation where there's not a real estate agent involved. Maybe it's family, and you probably see it more between family buying a family home or, through an estate. Do you work that the same way as far as like the contract? Do they need another attorney to draw that up? How do y'all go through that?
It really varies a little bit with each situation. There are some times where that situation comes up and people ask us to prepare a contract, which we'll do if they don't have a real estate agent. And then depending on the situation, we have a real simple form of a contract we can use if it's really just related parties and there's no earnest money or no secondary market, regular mortgage loan. We'll do it as simple as we can, but sometimes we'll have to sit down and prepare a full contract. But
Okay. So I've had people ask before, well, why do I need a title policy? Can you explain what a title policy is and why it's important?
I will start, and then I'm sure Andy will jump in and finish it. So, title insurance, and Andy kind of alluded to this, works in sort of two ways. It starts with us sort of taking a look backwards at the state of the title. And so we're conducting that title search. Generally runs from what they call the sovereign, which is the idea that at one point the state of Texas or the Republic of Texas owned all the real estate, and it works forward from there.
Okay.
And so the search that is conducted by a title company is going to go back in time and look to find any issues, that potentially pop up in that period of time. And depending on the nature of that issue, different ways that it can be handled. One of the most common, something you see on just about everything, is when the current owner bought the property, they got a loan, and that loan needs to be paid off.
Okay.
And so we're looking for things of that nature. And if we see it, and if it's an issue for the insurability, like what Andy was saying, then that's something that we're going to take care of as part of the closing process. And so that's kind of how I think of title insurance is working in like sort of a backwards facing way. But it also works moving forward, because then when we close the transaction, we issue that title insurance policy, which is the title company saying we are willing to insure or back up the title to this property subject to whatever the terms and conditions are in the title policy. And so if down the road someone shows up and says, well, I have a lien against that property, my loan didn't get paid off and I was the lender when the prior owner bought it, or well, that was my brother's property but I owned half of it. These things could potentially happen. If that happens in the future and we didn't get those taken care of and they weren't exceptions to the title policy, then it's just like any other insurance policy. There's a potential for the title insurer to pay the claim or defend the claim if it becomes a lawsuit or something like that. And so you really you have the idea that, hey, I'm buying this, everything that came before has been cleaned up, or at least to the degree that it's insurable, and then I have the assurance moving forward that if something does pop up, well, I've got that policy that I can fall back
So-
on.
Kind of like the gold seal of you've got free and clear ownership.
Yeah, the title insurers are weird about words like free and clear. Could you see me visibly get uncomfortable when you said that? No.
Yes.
But, because what we do is, what we sort of trade in is insurable title, and so, and that's that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not something that's out there or that
y'all couldn't find.
but perhaps it's so far in the past that.
But you're saying we're comfortable ensuring
Correct.
that this is
Yes.
good to go.
That
no one's-
you can be comfortable buying it
Right.
and knowing that you have the title insurance policy to fall back on.
Right.
But this is important. Well, first of all, there is no such thing as a clear title. And so we talk about this in our office all the time. Don't ever tell someone here that title is clear, because there's no clear title. Because every title in Texas, there's a lien on the property for real estate taxes
Okay.
that kicks back in January 1st of every year.
Okay.
So every title, every piece of real estate in Texas is subject to that lien. So I can't tell you the title's clear, because it's not. You have to, if you don't pay your property taxes, you'll find out real quick that you don't have clear title. Really, the way that we like to encourage people to think about title insurance, what the policy actually does, is it's an insurance contract, and it's ensuring you that you own the property. And if you look at a policy or a title commitment, there's really three parts to it. In the commitment, and the commitment is what we send out before closing, where we're agreeing to insure your title.
Right.
So it's a contract where we agree to insure it, and what it's agreeing is that we will insure you, how you're named in Schedule A, that you own the property listed in Schedule A, so that'll have your legal description of your property, subject to the exceptions that are listed in Schedule B. And so a lot of people always ask, do I even need to look at this? Well, if you want to know what you're buying, you need to read through it.
Right.
You need to make sure your name is right in Schedule A, that the property is what you thought you were buying. If you think you're buying 60 acres and it's only 58, that's where you're going to find that out. Schedule B is going to tell you what things affect your title. So if there's subdivision restrictions or deed restrictions, they'll be listed at the beginning of Schedule B. And then it talks about taxes and things like that that we can't get around. But then it'll list any specific exceptions that we find when we check title. So easements, prior mineral reservations, oil and gas leases, someone has a right of first refusal on the property, anything like that that may affect your ability to use the property is going to be listed in Schedule B.
Okay.
And then Schedule C in the commitment is the requirements we have. So that's where this loan needs to be paid off, or there's a federal tax lien that has to be taken care of.
Or an heir needs to sign an affidavit.
Exactly.
So they close on the house, the buyer, and say a problem does come up, or someone does come knock on the door saying, hey, I own a portion of this. What would the buyer's next step be?
So when the deal closes, after everything is filed, all the money transfers, kind of the final step for us is to issue that title insurance policy. And the title insurance policy goes to the party along with their recorded documents, generally a couple of weeks after closing. And I always tell people at closing, that's just a good document to hang on to. You're probably not ever going to need it, but if you do, it's good to have. And so that'd be a scenario where they might want it. And so that is like any other insurance policy, so their homeowners or their auto or whatever, in that there is a claims process. Now, Andy mentioned that, we and most title insurance companies are backed by a title insurer, which is a much larger company. So it's kind of like your local State Farm agent or whatever. It's not the agent so much who's insuring it, but it's State Farm. And so for us, that's First American, which is a large title insurance company. And so in the event that something comes up, there is a process to file a claim under that title insurance policy. When people call up here because they have that issue, we try to, walk them through where we can, try to talk through it with them. Eventually or ultimately, the insurer tells us to kind of get out of the way because it's up to them at that point, but we can certainly help people to kind of walk through that and get going with them. And then that can take a lot of different forms. You know, if it's a say there was a loan that didn't get paid off, you know, the insurance company may take the position that okay, they're going to pay the loan off, you know, to get clear title or to clear up that title issue. See, now I'm saying it. It's close to clear up that title issue, or let's say it's an easement issue. Well, they might negotiate that with the claimant on the easement or something on your behalf. But these title insurance companies have claims attorneys who that is their job, is to kind of figure out how to handle these claims that potentially come up.
So on an inclusion with this title insurance policy, there's always that little section in our contracts about shortages in area. Can you explain that so when we sit down with our clients and stuff, maybe they'll have a clearer idea of what that means and if they want it or not?
Okay. I will try to explain it. It's way more complicated than it should be. But basically, going back to Schedule B of the commitment, that's the exceptions to coverage. There's a standard exception in there. It's number 2 on Schedule B, and it takes exception to any conflicts or shortages in area or boundary lines or overlapping of improvements or encroachments.
Okay.
Basically, that wasn't word for word. But it's
So
close.
somebody's carport's on my land.
Exactly, or someone's storage building crosses over, or the fences aren't exactly on the property lines, or the house crosses over the property line. We've seen that.
Essentially, boundary line.
Any kind of boundary line issue.
Okay.
So what that's saying is we're ensuring that you own the property, but we're not ensuring you that there's no boundary line issues.
Okay.
So what the coverage in the contract allows you to do, if you select to get that coverage, it changes that paragraph to where the only thing it's taking exception to is shortages in area.
Okay.
So what that's basically doing is removing the exception for boundary line issues. So it's giving you some extra protection against boundary line issues. They leave the word shortages in area in there because if it's if your property's not in a subdivision where your legal description is Lot 1, Block B,
right.
Brook Hollow. If it's a meets and bounds legal description where it's 4.83 acres out of Section 48 lunatic asylum lands, everybody loves to talk about that. We're not ensuring you that acreage is exactly correct.
Right.
Because you can have 2 different surveyors go out on different days and they're going to come up with a slightly different acreage probably. So it's never ensuring you exactly what acreage you have. It's just by getting that coverage, it's giving you that assurance on that there's no boundary line problems. But the catch is, so here's where it gets really complicated. We can't issue that coverage unless we have an acceptable survey that shows that there's no boundary line issues.
So even if we find out that Mary's storage building is on our property, it would have to be moved in order to have that insurance.
Either moved, or we're going to have to add in a specific exception to the fact that the boundary line is encroached by this storage building.
Okay.
Or maybe what we do a lot is get a boundary line agreement, which is an agreement with the neighboring property owner that says everyone understands that there's an encroachment, but they all agree to leave it in place.
Okay.
So.
And that can be at the seller's or buyer's expense.
Yes.
And then usually, how much does that run? Just ballpark.
There's no ballpark.
It is a percentage of the title insurance premium, which the title premium is based on the purchase price. There's a formula that's, again, way overly complicated.
But it's the same all the way across the state for every title company.
Yeah, and so on a typical residential deal, it's 5%.
5%
right?
of the total premium.
Yeah. On a non-residential deal, it's 10% of the
Okay.
total premium, or 15.
I think it's 15.
I think it's 15, or yeah, it's 15.
Is that a good, do you suggest for that to be marked? I'm trying to be careful with my wording here, or is it like case by case? For some situations it's better and in other situations it's not?
You know, what you're really getting there, I think, is insurance against surveyor error. Because if, like Andy said, we can only issue it if we have a survey. And if there's anything that's shown on the survey, then we have to address it one way or another.
Right.
So the coverage, you know, in terms of being coverage against like some sort of like unknown issue or something,
Okay.
it's only if we didn't know the house was over the boundary line, you know, but we would only not know that if the survey was incorrect, right?
Right.
So, you know, kind of the way that I've approached it with people in the past is, you know, if it's something that the seller is willing to pay for, sure, you know, why not? It is more coverage, can't be wrong, right? But if it's up to the buyer, are they going to pay for it? Then I think it's maybe a little bit more of a case by case basis and just kind of what their sort of risk tolerance is, and you know, but they can generally look at the survey and they can also kind of look at what's out there on the ground and maybe come up with it. You know, I don't know that that's as important because I think everything is okay there. But you know, I don't know.
That was not a yes or no.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Good. Then it
Case
did
by
exactly what I was looking for.
Case
So
by
it's
case,
perfect.
I guess.
So you guys do a lot more than just for agents and contract to close. We talked, Kayla had asked about if it's someone that's, you know, doing family to family and stuff. But you guys have handled things like affidavits of heirships for people. And I think you've handled a few other things before in the past. You guys go and do the title searches down at the courthouses and stuff too, don't you?
Most of what we do, well, let me expand a little bit on the question you asked earlier about kind of our role as a title company. In our office, we also have a law firm.
Okay.
And so while we do the typical title company stuff, we also, as a law firm, prepare some of the documents for closing.
Okay.
Some title companies who don't have lawyers have to get outside lawyers to prepare like the deed and certain legal documents for closing. We're able to do that in-house, which kind of makes things more efficient. Particularly if something needs to be changed at the closing table or whatever, we can do it on the spot real quick. But in addition to that, we used to have kind of a broad legal practice as well, where we did a lot of corporate work and estate planning and probates. And as the title business has evolved and become more all-encompassing, we've kind of cut down on all that. So really, the only legal work we do is directly related to closings.
Okay.
So we'll do affidavits of heirship for, you know, if it's related to a closing or something like that, but we just generally don't.
So if you're following us, what you really want to do is talk to John from last week for all of your estate planning, and then come over here to these fine gentlemen to get it all buttoned up.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
Well, and like the title search you mentioned, you know, that is kind of the function of the title company on the title side. So that is something that we do
Right.
in connection with the closing.
So y'all still go downtown and dig through the books?
So great
and do all
question.
that?
So hopefully not, but occasionally yes. So all title insurance companies in Texas have to be licensed, and one of the things that allows them to be licensed in a particular county is to have what's called a plannant in that county, which is kind of our own version of the records that you would find in the courthouse. And so up until, within the last 10 years, our plant was actually located in the courthouse in a small office just across the street or across the aisle from the county clerks. And so when Andy and I both first started here, we would each day go down to the courthouse for a little while and dig around in the plant and dig around in the books and all that kind of stuff.
We actually had keys to the courthouse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we go up there, like when I started with the Bradshaws, we'd go up there at like 6:30 in the morning and check titles, and then do that till about 9, and then come to the office and do closings all day. And it was terrible. Or sometimes I'd have to go up there on weekends, like on a Saturday at the courthouse is not a fun Saturday. It's stuffy and terrible.
Oh,
So,
no.
thankfully we don't do that anymore.
So fortunately, it's a little bit better off now. So many of the records now are electronic and are available, you know, through like an electronic version of the plant that we have. But we do still maintain those old records. There's actually an office across the street from here where we have those old records, and so it is just big filing cabinets with all kinds of things in them, and sometimes you have to go in there and pull those out.
Okay, so
yeah.
how long did it take to do title searches back then versus today?
I mean, it's really case by case because every title,
Right.
you
Just
just don't
an
know what's
average.
going on. On a standard, like sort of lot and block deal, you check a title in maybe a half hour or so.
Yeah, and it depends a little bit on if we have a prior file
Yeah.
on that or not, because if we do, we only have to go back to our prior search.
And then just add to it.
Yeah, and add to it
Okay.
going forward. That's obviously a lot quicker, especially if it's a recent base file, is what we call them. But if it's not, if it's a regular lot and block City of Abilene deal and we don't have a prior file on it, 30, maybe 45 minutes to check
Okay.
one, if assuming it's just a normal one and not messy. If it's a meets and bounds land transaction that we don't have a prior on, it can take a day or a day and a half. I mean, it's just depending on how messy it gets. The worst ones we've seen, even one person could spend almost a week on one, maybe.
I had one of those. You guys handled it.
Yes.
Well, and I don't want to lump Andy in with this, but because I learned the old way, I'm probably just as faster doing it that way. Now, the people who are coming up now, they've learned on computers.
Right.
And so for them, they're much more efficient. If you put them down with like the records, they're just, but so it's just kind of how you learned or how you came up. But it's certainly just the ability to be like sitting at your desk and doing all or at least a huge chunk of the work makes that an easier process for sure.
So how many closings do you guys usually push a day through here?
That also depends.
On a busy day.
Yeah. So
Market too.
Yes.
the way we typically do the schedule is we're open from 8 to 5, and generally we book on the half hour.
Okay.
And so I guess that allows for 18 closings in a day on just a back to back to back day. There are days that are like that. When things were at their busiest, 2020, 2021, there were more days like that.
There were almost weeks like that.
Yeah, where you could look at like the entire calendar and it would just be, I would say a typical fairly busy day, 12, something like that, maybe is a reasonable number. Probably a good reason, just as a tip for agents or just anybody out there, if they are booking a closing, maybe they don't want to do it on the last day of the month, because that's just historically when everybody tries to close. Or even on a Friday.
On a Friday.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
This week's an example. We have
Friday's pretty.
7 closings today,
Mhm.
and Friday right now we have 15 or 16.
Oh wow.
So
So everybody's trying to close before the
3-day weekend.
Yeah.
3-day
Yeah.
Get their keys.
Yeah.
But if you can see those things like end of the month, 3-day weekend, Friday, whatever, if you can kind of see those and be like, maybe we could schedule around that a little bit, it might be to your benefit.
Yeah, I don't like closing I don't like to close like the Tuesday after a
Yes,
Thursday.
that's
That I have anxiety. Like going in that Friday, I get a little anxious.
Yeah, no,
Tell you the
that's-
truth on
and
my
that's
side.
a good.
the challenge with closing on a busy day like that is if everything goes perfect, that's fine. But if, let's say, we don't have the lender's loan documents until 2 hours before the closing, well, we need time to get those
right.
reviewed,
So their
dated.
closing might get pushed.
The closing might
to
get
Monday.
pushed, and we don't have a time. Or even if it doesn't, let's say we sign them up. It's not just the block on the calendar, the time that they're here. It's
Funding too.
yeah, it's working it up beforehand and then funding it afterwards. And we're busy on those days, but so is the funding department at the
Yeah.
lenders.
Yeah.
And so it can push everything back. And if people are, if a seller's wanting to get their money that day, if it's not funded by 3 o'clock, they may not get paid that day. And then, how some sellers are, they may not want to hand over the keys, and it just creates a lot of complications. So.
And my anxiety.
Yes. There you go.
So how do you just cover Taylor County? What are your counties that y'all cover? Or how do you,
So we have
how's that?
title plants in Taylor and Callahan County. The Callahan plant, there was a title company there called Russell Searles Title,
Right.
and we bought them out in 2012, 10. And so we've just kind of rolled that into our operation. So that's where we're licensed, where we have title plants, but we can actually do closings anywhere in Texas. And if we're doing a closing in a county where we don't have a title plant, we just have to order title work from a local title company there that does. So, we don't do many residential deals in other counties, but we actually do quite a few commercial transactions and farm and ranch stuff. One thing we do a lot of, just somehow we've gotten into this, is convenience store closings. And so we do
Really?
those all over Texas. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
So with today's technology and stuff, I know you said you've done closings all over. Do you do a lot of it like through a digital signature now, or do you still have to have a wet signature, or do you have like a mobile notary go and show?
So the signature requirements, a lot of that is kind of lender dependent on kind of what they're willing to take and what they're willing to not. At this point, this day and age, it is possible to close even a transaction with documents that have to be filed down at the courthouse all digitally. You can do, and there are some providers of this. There are also just people who have their online notary, but you can even digitally sign documents that are then notarized and then sent down to the courthouse for filing. Where the rubber meets the road on a lot of that is that the lenders still want wet signatures on certain documents. If nothing else, maybe at least the note or the deed of trust. And so when we have a closing where the people are not local or they're going to be gone or whatever, we do have a couple of different options that we can pursue. I mentioned earlier, using like a power of attorney. Like if somebody is going to be here and they want to give the authority to somebody else, if it's individuals, they can do it that way.
No, that's just for signing. The power of attorney is just for signing.
Correct.
It's not giving power of attorney.
Well,
for every-
right. Now, you can do it however you want, but go see John.
Go see John.
Yes, but you can do a power of attorney just for the specific purpose of signing for the transaction. Yeah. If it's an entity, that it's not exactly the same, but kind of the process is similar to get a certain person like set up to sign for the company or whatever. If they are going to be somewhere else and we do need to do wet signatures on documents, then we can either, if they have their own notary, they can kind of get that taken care of. We also work with a company that is sort of a nationwide network of mobile notaries, and they will go and meet people anywhere on their schedule and get them signed up. I've never had a scenario where they couldn't get to a person, because periodically people will say, well, I'm in the backwoods of wherever, they'll never find me, and it's never been a problem yet. Or we can do like the online notary, if we have a situation where we can do that. We also, on that, we work with a provider of that. It's a company called notarize.com, and they will facilitate that as well. And so, as time goes by, those are becoming more and more standard or things that get done on more and more transactions. And I think that will just continue to be the case, particularly as more and more lenders get more and more comfortable with not having those wet signed documents.
Now you mentioned power of attorney. It's just power of attorney with a transaction that you guys are doing. It's not like a power of attorney, or can you write a power of attorney that's not with a deal that you're working?
When we typically don't prepare powers of attorney that are not for transactions here.
Okay.
You would go see your
wanted to
estate
clear
plan.
that.
Yeah, you would go see your estate planning attorney if you were looking for something like that. But we, when we do have a deal, we can prepare a specific power of attorney just for that real estate transaction.
because usually the way we get involved in that is a realtor, sometimes a lender, calls us and says, hey, they need a power of attorney for this closing, and we draw it up. To do one that covers more than that, someone really needs to sit down with an attorney and talk about what they're trying to
Call
accomplish.
John.
Right next to John.
But to just kind of bring that, if someone does have that power of attorney, like they did go get the full-blown durable general power of attorney or whatever, that can be used
Okay.
in a real estate transaction. Sometimes lenders are particular about what the attorney looks like, but just as a general rule, if you have one of those, that will also work. It's
Now,
just it
when-
wouldn't necessarily be prepared. for
When
that.
a client brings in documentation like a power of attorney or an affidavit of heirship or something like that, or a will, a probate, or whatever, when they bring those documents in, do they need to bring in or provide the original document itself, or will a copy suffice?
Good question. Usually, most of the time, a copy's fine for us. And a lot of times, we're not going to want them to bring the original of that because I don't want it to be misplaced. So,
Right.
so for us, a copy's usually fine. If we end up needing an original for some reason, we can get it later. But in most situations, a copy's okay. There are still some counties, and a lot of counties, most counties in Texas now, we can e-record documents.
Okay.
So we don't have to have the originals for that. But in counties where we can't e-record, like Callahan so far, then you have to have the original to record it.
Okay.
So that's where we.
In the counties that you can e-record and stuff,
Mhm.
they still have to be legible. So even
Yes.
if it's been copied like several times over, but it's starting to become illegible and stuff, you'll need a legible copy.
Yes. And it has to be, document has to be notarized to be recorded. So
Okay.
the notary stamp and signature, all that has to be legible as well.
Okay. You have any other questions?
I don't think so.
Oh, did great.
Well,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Yes.
I told you, wasn't that bad?
No.
So if y'all have any questions, just give them a call. Andy and Chris, they're very, very knowledgeable in all this, and I think I've driven them nuts over 12, 13 years now with the amount of questions I've asked. But they've always had an answer for me one way or the other. So give them a call, First Texas Title. They're amazing.